Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's FS Club event towards a more sustainable future for civil society organisations. My name is Ian Harris, and I'm here to introduce to you Dr. Sara Abdaless. Before we start, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all of our sponsors, without whom none of this would be possible. Sara actually comes from NU University, Northeastern University London, which is one of our sponsors. And oh, look, it's a word from our chairman. He looks a bit like me. No, this is my bit, a word from our chairman. So I'm really here just to introduce things. And Lucas, if we can move on to the next slide. This is today's agenda, my introduction, which I hope will come in at under 5 minutes. And then I will hand you over to Dr. Sara Abdaless to give the main talk. We've left about 20 minutes at the end for what we call questions and answers. Sara is very keen to get comments and maybe ideas as well as questions. So please put your thinking caps on and as open a way as possible around today's topic. And today's topic is very much a home topic for me. I am the ZN director who has spent most of his time in the last 30 plus years working with civil society organizations, mostly large charities and trade unions. So Sara's talk today about sustainability within the civil society and collaboration between charities and trades unions is very much a sort of home base thing for me. I could read out Sara's CV, but I always thought that's a bit dull for everybody because you've read it and thought, yes, I want to hear this person speak. Sara is Associate Professor of Accounting and Finance at Northeastern University London, which is one of our partners and sponsors, as I've just said, and has been doing some deep research into this subject in recent years. And I am genuinely fascinated to hear what Sara has to say, as well as honoured to be chairing today's event. I asked Sara to let me know some things about her that aren't on the CV, because you've probably all read the CV. So I've got 3 things here. Sara likes to bake. She speaks 5 languages other than English, which I think is, I'd say, a bit of a record. And she also likes to describe herself, and I think this is more about the topic of today's talk and discussion. She describes herself as an impact junkie, by which she means, I believe, that she is looking for civil society organizations to make as much impact as they possibly can. And clearly this space where we look to the organizations to collaborate with each other and try to get more impact through teaming than they could get individually is one of the ways that we might be looking to civil society to be doing this. Enough of me. And I've managed to get that done within 2 or 3 minutes. There we go. So I would like straight away to hand over to Sara Abdaless and hear what you have to say, Sara.
Thank you so much, Ian, for the introduction, and thank you for having me today. I'm really honoured. So without further ado, so as you've already mentioned, the topic of today's session or webinar is about the role of effective collaboration between civil society organisations and trade unions. And if we can move to the next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of background on this project. So it is a project that investigates collaboration between civil society organisations, namely charities, advocacy, campaigning organisations, etc., and trade unions. And a key aim of the project is to ascertain what makes collaboration effective between these elements of civil society, with a view to finding ways of improving collaboration and ultimately making more collaborations between these sectors. The research has been funded partly by the British Academy Small Research Grant, and it is a collaboration itself between myself, Dr. Mike Rigby from London South Bank University, and Dr. Steve William from the University of Portsmouth. If we can move to the next slide, please. So, a little bit of context. So, what do we mean by civil society? Civil society, for those who may not necessarily be familiar with, is the space outside of family, market, and the state, embracing organisations including non-governmental organisations, trade unions, social movements, grassroots or local organisations, faith groups, online networks, and communities. For the purposes of this particular research, we focused on NGOs and charities and trade unions in particular. We were initially very much open to having other elements of civil society within the study, but because of the time frame and because of the limited resources, we just decided to focus on these particular elements of civil society. So why civil society is important? It is important because it has a purpose, and one of it is to maintain a strong democracy around the UK and the world, and the role of intermediary organisations in providing avenues for the voices of members of society to be heard, and in particular voices from those who are not necessarily represented traditionally in society. A contemporary concern about the health of civil society has been discussed in the literature, and it is widely acknowledged, and that is the weakness of intermediate organisations at a time when insecurity and challenges faced by societies are increasing, and that could be the cost of living crisis, crisis in health systems, military threats, wide inequalities and climate change, to cite just a few. And another reason is because I feel civil society is there to fill in a gap in the services provided by other elements of the economy, for instance, the private sector, the government organisations, and there is always a gap, and that gap is generally filled in the form of service provision, etc., by civil society organisations, and they do play a really, really major role. So ensuring that their impact is magnified is one of the real purposes of the study. If we can move to the next slide, please. So examples of challenges faced by these two major elements of civil society, we've got the NGOs are depending mostly on government funding, and that has an implication on their autonomy, and also how that gets affected during periods of austerity, for instance. Also the COVID pandemic. And when we started our research, or it was before the pandemic, but the meaning of the research became even more evident and more apparent because of the pandemic and because of what the pandemic had done to the economy and society in general. And also, there is an increased scrutiny from various stakeholders and agencies on the governance and accountability and transparency of these civil society organisations and charities. And also, there is a threat to the level of volunteering. It's very volatile, and it does vary, and therefore maintaining that safe space or safe level of volunteering is detrimental to NGOs. So these are some of the challenges that NGOs face. In terms of trade unions, I think most people would know that the membership has been declining, and it is nothing compared to how it used to be in its peak during the 1970s. That also means there is a decline in its bargaining coverage and a reduction on influence upon government as well. All of these are core issues to both the trade unions and NGOs, and therefore collaboration between these weakened elements of civil society is even more important. If we can move to the next slide, please. So, given the challenges faced, there has been an increasing number of advocates of collaboration between these two elements. And among the benefits of collaboration has been suggested reaching a wider audience, and being able to recruit more volunteers, members, the ability to share services, sharing expertise and resources, and also, you know, gaining greater legitimacy for both the unions and for the CSOs, but also being able to campaign more effectively, have a greater influence on policies of the government and government agencies, ultimately achieving the purposes and the goals of each of these elements. Some of the potential obstacles which we have identified both in the literature but also in our research project were very much around the union organization in NGOs and how unions are perceived by NGOs and vice versa. And that is mainly due to the different values and cultures of these two sectors, and also political sensitivity of relations with trade unions, which is mainly felt by the NGOs, and also the obstacle that is kind of common to both of them, and that is lack of resources or reduced levels of resources, and that could be financial resources, human resources, etc. If we can move to the next slide, please. So existing literature on collaboration between the two sectors is extremely limited. So there has been a call for more work and how important collaboration is between these two elements of civil society. However, where we found a gap in the literature, and therefore that motivated us to carry out the research that we did. So we're trying to fill a gap in the literature as well as a gap in practice. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So how did we collect the data and what was the process to this research? I think you've probably seen also in the abstract that this is a three-stage process. So the first stage was a preliminary phase where we conducted 15 preliminary interviews with key informants and stakeholders from trade unions and civil society organizations, from people who worked in NCVO and the TUC. Also, the second stage, and that informed kind of the survey that we've done in the second stage, which was a survey to civil society organisations and a different survey, different version of it to trade unions to capture the nuances in both sectors. So 84 responses in total have been obtained, 50 from the third sector and 34 from trade unions. Typically responses from both policy officers of the organisation. So we've had that kind of consistently throughout the responses. And it was made very clear initially to the respondents that we're not looking at collective bargaining. We're looking at other forms of collaboration other than collective bargaining, and there is plenty of literature on collective bargaining, and that is not what we were looking for, and we were very clear about that in our surveys and our interviews. So the study started in 2022 at the very end of 2022 summer, and then it kind of concluded in the summer of 2024. So it's about a 2-year, 18-month period between the start and the kind of conclusion of the study. The report from the survey findings has been presented during a webinar to the participants, and we've sought further feedback on the findings that we have collated, which was very, very useful, and we've had really good engagement from the participants, which was very nice to see. And then we've had, following on from the survey results, 23 interviews based on 12 cases of collaboration, which we identified through the analysis of the survey results. So we have been asking these open-ended questions in the survey where we were requesting cases of collaboration and examples of collaboration, and whether there is a willingness to engage in further research, interviews, etc. And we were overwhelmed by the level of openness that these organisations have demonstrated. Next, please. Sorry, excuse me. So the way that we have gathered the data, mainly snowballing sampling method, we have had interviews initially with TUCN and CVO, and each we ask them to recommend other people and flag any collaborations that they know of, and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of word of mouth and introductions and reintroductions within that network. So we wouldn't have been able to do it without those people and their generosity. We've also used LinkedIn to identify key people that we wanted to interview and send the surveys to. And the results have been analysed qualitatively through a thematic analysis and a framework analysis. If we can move to the next slide, please. So the 12 cases of collaboration that we have identified, some of them have really achieved some high profile and have been mentioned in the news, etc. Some of them were relatively small, but we were really getting something out of each one of them. So I'm just going to go very quickly through them now, if we can move to the next slide. And I hope that people can see, I've tried to make it as big as possible and fit it in within one single slide. I'm not sure whether there is a possibility to, and I think there are possibilities to make the screen a little bit bigger. There is a plus sign, I think, on the side as well. So these are the 12 cases, and I wouldn't have time to go through all of them, but I just wanted to kind of run through very quickly through them. And if you have any comments or questions or want to understand a little bit further on each of these, we have a report and we'd be happy to share it. So the first case was between the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers and the Royal National Institute of Blind People. And this one was a really successful, relatively short collaboration, but very impactful. So the campaign was to prevent the closure of rail ticket offices, which was a joint effort between the the RMT, I'm going to say a different acronym, sorry about that, the RMT and the RNIB, but also involved other CSOs as well. But these were kind of really detrimental to the success of the collaboration. And it only took about 6 months, I think, for the campaign to actually take some results and to see some results, and prevented the closure of the rail ticket offices for a good reason. And then the second case was the Pharmacists Defence Association and its collaboration with Parkinson's UK. And again, I think that was a really big one that was also in the news. And the campaign was to provide free medication in the case of serious long-term illnesses and preventing introducing prescription charges for, or reducing the age for prescription charges as well, which would have had an impact on people deteriorating health-wise and not being able to afford buying those prescriptions themselves, and the cost to the NHS. Unfortunately, the cost to NHS, or the potential cost to the NHS, was not captured necessarily. However, that's kind of one of the things that, you know, collaborations would have been more impactful potentially if those if that data was available to these organisations. The third case was between Unison and the Joint Council for the Welfare of Migrants, which established a helpline for migrant workers, which was initially a very kind of temporary measurement, and it was an ad hoc basis. And then, because there was a huge demand, it became a lot more permanent, and there was a really good success from that collaboration as well. And the list goes on. I don't have the time to go through all of them, as I'm aware of the time being shorter. However, these are all really impactful collaborations, and we can move on to the next slide to talk a little bit about further key findings. So the CSOs we found have been generally positive about trade unions, and quite a lot of support exists for closer relations with them. Um, a significant minority, about 40% of CSOs, collaborate with unions already on an ongoing basis, and that most trade unions claim to have a good relationship with CSOs and see collaboration with them as important and something they would like to extend further. And also another finding was that the current areas of collaboration have included equal rights, civil political rights, health, education and training, poverty, welfare, climate change and migrant rights. I'm sure the list is longer than this if we've managed to talk to everybody, but these are the ones that we have captured during our study. If you can move to the next slide, please. So the key benefits of collaboration for CSOs and trade unions has been that, that collaboration was able to support campaigns and enhance campaign activity, being better able to influence government policy through lobbying, and ability to access and share knowledge and expertise, which is really, really a key thing there, because they each hold different expertise and different knowledge. Together, it does create that synergy, and it does create that really, really good impact and power really between the two. If we can move to the next slide, please. So for CSOs, the main barrier, and we're talking here about the barriers to collaboration, has been the lack of time. And I think that's something that has been potentially shared by the trade unions as well. Lack of knowledge of unions, and that is another really key obstacle there. That lack of knowledge or even misconception of one another, and also unions not considered important enough for CSOs, and this has come through the study that we've been conducting. For trade unions, collaboration has been inhibited again by lack of knowledge of CSOs, and also to less extent by the experience and perceptions of the collective bargaining relationship and the importance of dissociating the two. So there is a union's role as in collective bargaining, but also union can do other fantastic things by putting their hands into the CSO's hands. Next slide, please. So the guidelines for effective collaboration, and as you can see, we've come up with 15 guidelines, and the first one is deciding upon the appropriate form of collaboration, and I can go on and on each one of these separately. However, I would also invite any potential questions and comments around these areas. So deciding upon the appropriate form of collaboration, would that be ad hoc? Would that be ongoing? Would that be implicit or explicit? The second one is recognizing and articulating common interests. Really, really important to, from the start, understand what each other's interests are and why the motivation behind doing this kind of collaboration between the two sectors. And also the skills and knowledge sharing. Each party brings different skills and different knowledge to the table. And one of them is, for instance, trade unions have a great understanding of the workforce, the trends, the HR policies, etc., that potentially the CSOs wouldn't have. But CSOs also have great understanding and knowledge of the needs of certain groups that are not necessarily traditionally represented by the trade unions. So just using that knowledge expertise that each brings to the table. Taking advantage of the legitimacy brought by each partner, and the legitimacy, for instance, for trade unions is the membership and the backing of their members. Exploiting, which is the fifth guideline, exploiting the political leverage of partners and their political stance and potential links with certain political parties. The sixth one is upholding worker interest, including job security at heart. And I think that is really, really important for both, and in particular to trade unions, having a clear understanding of what they stand for and what motivates them, so that collaboration is more successful. The seventh one is identifying the most important methods of collaboration. So how do we want to collaborate, and Is it going to be a toolkit? Are we going to be educational? Are we going to lobby? What kind of strands are we going through? And the next one, please. And I'm aware of the time as well. So the eighth one is building and sustain effective relationship between individuals in the collaboration. Sometimes a collaboration will start with an individual, but it's really, really important to make sure that that collaboration goes beyond that individual, because things happen and individuals move on, roles, organizations, etc. So making sure that there is an institutionalized aspect of that collaboration for it to be sustained in the future. The ninth one is managing effectively the resources available, and these two sides or these two parties are both resource poor in a way. They don't have that many resources, so how can they use their resources more efficiently and maybe have a very clear idea about which resources are going to be used? And sometimes trade unions do have a lot of resources available to them through membership fees, etc. The 10th one is a mutual understanding. I think I've kind of touched upon that. So having an understanding of each organisation and what that makes them motivated. The 11th one is identifying and exploiting successes. These collaborations tend to sometimes be long term, and the success is measured by attaining those objectives, which are very long term objectives. And therefore, are kind of agreeing what would be a measure of success early on. Is it launching the campaign? Is it coming up with a toolkit? Is it starting a lecture series, etc., etc.? So to keep the collaboration motivated and keep people willing to kind of commit to it. And then the 12th one is recognizing the possible tension between collective bargaining and collaboration. And I think one of the things there is to kind of separate the roles of those who are in collective bargaining roles and union representatives, and maybe going for policy officers in these instances to keep it nice and clear. And then the third one, establishing the data required to support collaborations. And I think that's really, really important, having data to back it up. And I've mentioned earlier the example of the NHS and how data could really strengthen the case. So anything that is kind of achieved is backed up by data. The 14th one is identifying the appropriate organizational level of the operation of collaboration. Sometimes it's local. Sometimes it is more national. So local branches of unions would be kind of engaging in such collaboration, and that's absolutely fine as long as that's agreed upon at the start. And sometimes that kind of organically grows into a more national campaign, for instance. And the 15th one is mapping out and facilitating future opportunities for collaboration. So not stopping there, but keeping the ball rolling and having potentially some aspirations for the future. And if we can move on to the next one, please. So I am concluding now. The current socio-economic climate, effective collaboration between the elements of civil society are more important than ever. I truly believe in that, and the research has demonstrated that as well. So effective collaboration between trade unions and CSOs is achieving greater social, economic and environmental justice, which is really, really needed in today's environment. So these guidelines are guidelines and they're not exhaustive. So any other ideas that you may have and we may have missed, please do share them with us. And if you have any other examples, please do share them with us. We would be very, keen to explore more. And we are aiming to create a toolkit as well as a next step for collaboration, something that is more practical for organizations to use. And then also taking it further to understand the nuances of different international jurisdictions and cultural differences. And we are doing a collaborative comparative study between the UK and Spain. So interviews have been nearly concluded now in Spain in that regard. So a new study will be coming out soon. And thank you so much for the time. I'm sorry I've kind of overrun a little bit, but yeah, any questions, any interest, please. I've put my email address there. If you want to get in touch, I would be delighted. Thank you.
Sara, thank you very much. That was fascinating. It was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but it's obviously quite a deep piece of qualitative research. It's quite difficult to try to encapsulate such a piece of research in 20 or 25 minutes. That you've done a terrific job of that. So thank you very much for that. I'd just like to pick up on this international component, which was the last point that you made, and was on my list of sort of interesting follow-up topics. Obviously, you're going to be doing that deep work with Spain, but I wonder if you have any sense from the research that you've done or the background research you did before you did your deep research as to the extent to which these sorts of collaborations are more common, less common, or similarly common in other countries. Do some jurisdictions seem and some cultures seem to encourage this type of collaboration more than others?
Thank you so much for the question, Ian. I would say that from the initial understanding from the findings we've got from Spain as well, is that we are very different. There is the power that these trade unions potentially have in different countries is varies, and more continental European countries have got that power more than probably here in the UK. So trade unions do play a major role in other jurisdictions compared to potentially the UK, and therefore collaboration is going to differ in that respect. But it is really fascinating, and I don't want to say something that is not going to represent really what the results are going to be about, but it is different from what we are saying already, and it's something that is really, really exciting, and we're looking forward to actually seeing the results in a comparative way. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I mean, it just feels like one of those areas where perhaps there are lessons that can be learned for organisations in the UK from other jurisdictions and vice versa. That leads on to another question that has been sort of nagging in my mind all the while that I've known that I was going to be hosting this thing, because I have been involved in putting collaborations together between various different bits of civil society, and I remember being dragged along to a debate at the Treasury maybe 20 years ago or more, maybe nearer to 25 years ago, when Gordon Brown was the Chancellor of the Exchequer before he was Prime Minister, and he hosted it because he felt that there should be more collaboration going on between the commercial sector and civil society sector and different bits of the civil society sector and so on. And one of the issues that we have been coming across, and I spoke to some of the top-ranking civil servants about this, who to some extent shrugged their shoulders and just said, well, yes, we need to try to make this easier for people, is some of the sort of fiscal issues that people would raise around these things. So some of the collaborations that we wanted to put together, where they were genuinely coming together and forming organizational groups to work together, were fiscally incredibly complex, because charities have one tax status and trade unions have another tax status, and even charities working together, if you put a few of them together, HA Revenue and Customs wanted to look on that as a VAT group, and the VAT would be applied to things that otherwise VAT wouldn't be applied to. There are all sorts of issues around that, none of which I believe have really been resolved yet. And I just was intrigued to know whether those sorts of impediments came up in your research, and if they didn't come up in your research, maybe that's a clue as to why the areas that get covered by these collaborations are the areas that get covered, and other areas that possibly would be right for collaboration don't seem to come into the frame.
That's a really good question / comment, Ian. Really, really good. It didn't come up in our research per se, and that's a really good point for us to explore further, actually, and definitely going back to the data as well. And I mean, I would have noticed anything like that because that's my kind of accounting finance is my background. However, it didn't come across, and it is something that potentially more structurally important as well, in making or breaking a collaboration from the start. So it is something that we will definitely be looking at and exploring. So thank you very much for that.
And just one of the follow-up question, really, or a related point, which is around sort of what I might call objects clause issues. So whenever we would come up with a bright idea where we thought, why don't several charities get involved with this thing? some of the pushback that we would get would be not sure that this is really covered by our objects clause. So, we could only get involved with this bit of it. We couldn't get involved with all of it. And again, did that come up? And is that as much of an issue everywhere? I'm not sure.
It didn't necessarily come up. However, I think what has been coming up is kind of that motivation, and yes, the limits that each organization has to engage in a collaboration, and making sure that it aligns with their core mission and values. And maybe the ones that we spoke to is because they've generally been successful in their collaboration. And we would be interested in talking to others that haven't been successful necessarily. So if you know any of those, please do pin them over to me, because we can learn from the successes, but we can also learn from the failures even more potentially. So the only thing that came up was kind of having that alignment between the core values and missions, and having a commonality to achieve at the end of it.
Sara, thanks very much for that. Very, very, very unusually, we haven't had all that many questions come in, but a couple of questions or comments from people who want to hear more of your talk than you actually delivered. And it's the bit around the collaborations that are around climate and climate change and green. There were several of them towards the end that you glossed through. Could you just talk us through one or two of those, just to give people a feel for how those collaborations work? Because clearly we've got several people in the audience who are interested very specifically in that type of collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the collaborations in particular, those that involve, for instance, Friends of the Earth, were about generating campaigns to talk about, for instance, if I may go back, let me just, I've got some of my slides here.
Can you go back through the slides, Lucas, and show us the collaboration slide again?
Yeah, so if I take the case number 10,
Thank
for
you.
instance, thank you so much. Promoting a just transition at work, and how these green jobs that are being created would necessitate a certain level of skills and knowledge that people do not necessarily have. So how can these people be equipped with the right knowledge and skills to be well able to do and deliver on those jobs? So the transition between the traditional ways of working and roles and jobs into more greener jobs, and how can a collaboration between a trade union who understands the workers' needs and the problems and the issues that they are going through, and also cares about their interests and making sure that they have sustainable jobs for the future, and also that piece around education and upskilling of that workforce to make sure that they are not disadvantaged. And also there is a number of campaigns in particular. For instance, if we talk about the Climate Justice Coalition and Greener Job Alliance as well. So mobilising, doing campaigns to ensure that there is a greater awareness. All of these sustainability, climate change concepts, we hear them all the time, but what do they really mean? So it is about breaking them down, making sure that people have that understanding of what it really truly means and the impact it would have on people's lives going forward, and how can people engage with this through policy, through campaign, through lobbying, etc. So this is where it has been going. And also when we talk about, for instance, Friends of the Earth, their involvement in campaigning during COP26, for instance, and just raising the flag and awareness on matters that have pressing urgency in our lives and will have a detrimental impact on everyday's lives. And I think that's really, really important, because if we're talking to public sector, for instance, private sector in particular, public sector as well, we do talk about the transition, we talk about greener jobs, and we talk about the future is green, the future is about sustainability. But does the workforce really understand that? And how can that be kind of made more mundane and more accessible to everybody? And I think that's where it's not really something that has been addressed necessarily by the public sector or private sector. It is something that has been addressed by that type of collaboration. And I was saying earlier, there is generally a gap in the service provision from different sectors, and it is being filled by civil society organisations, and a collaboration with the trade unions enhances that further. And we've
One
got
more.
all of that written down, sorry, in the report. So there is more information about, for instance, each and individual cases as well in our reports.
Yeah, I know. I would encourage those of you who sort of have deeper questions about the cases, which seems to have attracted a lot of interest, to take a look at the report. It's available for everyone to see if you want it. Just one final question, which is to do with the snowballing way that you got to do the deep qualitative research. By using that method, is it possible that you missed out on the collaborations that didn't work, and that you've only really got to hear about the ones that did work because the ones that didn't work sort of got buried and no one talks about them? Or are you confident that the means of research that you used, that if there were aspects of these things that, whatever you do, don't do it this way, that you would have learned that?
I think from the cases that we focused on, they were cases of collaboration and generally were successful. It doesn't mean that there were no challenges. So that's why when we collated the data, we did focus on what were the challenges. So one of the questions were, what were the challenges to collaboration? And these came out in force. So there was a lot of elements, and we've mentioned some of them today. For instance, the lack of time, the lack of resources, the lack of mutual understanding. And those have been actually detrimental in those areas where collaboration was not that successful. So I think we're confident in that we've kind of captured what could hinder a collaboration. However, we're very much open to any other examples where things haven't gone well. And some of the collaborations have ended and they were not renewed, although they were mentioned in the survey. When we did the interviews, those collaborations were a kind of one-off and didn't elaborate and sustain themselves into the future. And therefore, they may have been successful in the kind of shorter term, smaller scale, but not so much if you think about the potential of those collaboration could have been greater.
I get that. So one of the challenges that we face is that we run out of time when we do these things, and guess what, everybody, we have run out of time. But I mean, you can see from the way that Sara discusses this, the discussion could and should go on outside the webinar. So please get in touch with Sara, read the report, and get in touch with Sara if you've got cases of your own or ideas for how this research can be pursued somewhat further. Sara would love to hear from you, and I, like Sara, have been steeped in this sector or these sectors for a long time, and really welcome this type of research and welcome the idea of trying to get more impact by organisations working together. Lucas, can we move on to the thank you slides? So thank you again to our sponsors, without whom none of these webinars would be possible. The list is there and on all the slide packs for people. Thanks also, of course, to the audience. Oh gosh, yes, it's beholden upon me to let you know what's coming up soon. Now, if you are FS Club junkies or Zien junkies, there is yet more today. You can go to the Employee Share Plan Symposium this afternoon and this evening. Yes, this afternoon and this evening. But I suspect that those who are interested in that have already signed up to it. In less than 2 weeks' time, if ESOP is your thing, we have the ESOP SOFA and the AGMs and remuneration policies and share plan design. So very ESOP focused June. And for those of you who like face-to-face as well as webinars, Tuesday the 1st of July is the date for your diaries. It's the FS Club Summer Mixer, and the topic for discussion will be, can AI survive regulation? So I think the only other thank you that remains, apart from thanking the visitors, of course, the people who've come to the webinar, is to thank you, Sara, for such an interesting talk and such thoughtful answers to everybody's comments and questions. The rounds of applause are coming in electronically. I can see them. So thank you very much, Sara. Thank you very much, audience. And until next time, goodbye.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.